Good morning. Robin and I thought we'd come over here for a bit of a warm-up, but it seems that the climate here is very similar to the climate in Queensland, nice and cool. Stanthorpe certainly is known as the coldest town in Queensland. Really enjoyed that children's story, Lloyd. I don't know about you little kids, but us big kids, I was right in on it. I can relate to that. I like that sort of fair dinkum story. And it was just so nice to be reminded that our sins do catch up with us. They do find us out. Let's just seek the Lord in prayer for a moment, shall we? Our loving Father in heaven, we count it a privilege to be found in your house of worship this morning. And I just ask that you will open our hearts and our minds, give me words to speak, and may it be that we can go from this place with a clearer and fresher vision of you. And I ask this in your wonderful name, Jesus. Amen. More than 250,000 people, pilgrims, atheists, clergy, diplomats, media and tourists were all compressed into St. Peter's Square there in the city of Rome. The magnificent architectural surroundings, crowned by crosses and saints, were a public display of both wealth and religion, two very powerful factors that have had a greater impact on national and global security than anything else in history. The crowd stood with their eyes gazing up at that small balcony to witness the last public blessing of Pope Benedict XVI, the first pope in almost 600 years to resign from his position as Bishop of Rome and sovereign of the Vatican City. It was a globally significant event, and it had drawn scores of media from across the planet. 8 years earlier, the funeral of Benedict's predecessor, Pope John Paul II, was attended by an unprecedented number of kings, presidents, prime ministers, and other political leaders, causing many commentators to question whether the passing of a pope was still primarily a religious occasion or an event that was a growing political significance. 2 weeks after Benedict's unexpected resignation, it was announced to an anxiously waiting world that Pope Francis would be the 266th Pope of the Catholic Church. Francis became the first ever Jesuit Pope, the first Pope from the Americas, and the first Pope from the Southern Hemisphere. And he was the first non-European Pope in more than 1,000 years. History was unfolding right before our eyes. Yes, it was just one of the thousands of significant events that have shaped the history of Europe and indeed of our world over the millennia. Events that are underwritten by wealth and displayed through the medium of religion. And yet, you and I this morning live in an age when religion is becoming increasingly a dirty word. And there's no lack of reasons, as religious people grossly misrepresent the faiths that they claim to serve. Things like pedophilia, embezzlement, terrorism, and so on, the world turns away in disgust. Secularism, materialism, and atheism are growing at an ungodly rate, and their dominance of the media is nearly complete. To be fair, though, very few religious people are sword-wielding extremists, dreadlocked holy men, or placard-waving fanatics. However, news corporations make more money reporting on the atrocities committed by perverted individuals and small groups of religious extremists than by revealing the far-reaching benefits of the Mother Teresa types, who have genuine faith and selfless characters, regardless of whether they're Christians, whether they're Muslims or Hindus, or followers of some other faith. So it's no wonder that we so easily lose sight of the significant roles that religion still play in global security and geopolitics, whether it's for better or for worse. Political analysts debate endlessly, will China be Earth's next superpower? Will the Vatican and the United States form some sort of holy alliance and rule the world? How much will religious terrorism and immigration destabilise Europe? The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius made the following insightful statement almost 2,000 years ago, and I quote, "Look back over the past with its changing empires that rose and fell, and you can foresee the future too." History reveals countless reasons for wholesale transfer of military and economic supremacy from one power to another. However, an in-depth study of world history reveals that time after time, the downward spiral of empires actually follows an eerily similar circumstance. Regardless of our worldview on topics such as capitalism and communism, God and atheism, environmentalism and industrialisation, there is one chain of historical events that every person ought to consider at least once in their lifetime. It is actually a geopolitical prediction that is recorded, as strange as it might seem, in the ancient Jewish scriptures, and yet it is a timeline of history that directly impacts today's global economics and security. Based exclusively on archaeological and historical evidence, this prophetic timeline's prediction and their accurate fulfilment are simply astounding. In fact, the timeline is so amazing and its predictions are so relevant and life-changing that literally millions of people across the planet are right now restudying it in detail. You see, in the 6th century BC, that's about 2,600 years ago, a man named Daniel wrote a little book with just 12 chapters. Daniel, as you remember, was a Jewish prisoner of war. And yet he so greatly impressed his captor, the king of Babylon, that he was rapidly appointed to a high political role. Daniel became the overseer of all of Babylon, an ancient city that was located 85 kilometres south of Baghdad in Iraq. It was the capital of the mighty Babylonian Empire. And I would invite you this morning to come with me in your scriptures to Daniel chapter 2. Had to be, didn't it? You'll notice that Daniel's written account describes some dreams that Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar had in about the year 601 BC. And I'd like to draw your attention to verse 31, and I'm using New King James this morning. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 31. "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendour was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome." So we find here that there's a great statue, and it's rather large in size because it says there that its form was awesome. Verse 32 goes on to say, "The image's head was of gold, the chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze." 33, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Skip down with me, would you, to verse 45, and we'll look at the last part of verse 45. And it says there, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is what? Certain, and its interpretation is sure. In that sure interpretation, Daniel explained to the king Nebuchadnezzar that the statue's head of gold was his own kingdom, that kingdom of Babylon. And it's a fact that I'm sure would have made the king very pleased, very happy. Verse 38, Daniel 2. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of thy field, and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. In verses 39 through to 41, Daniel continues. Let's read it there. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet strength of iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with the ceramic clay. If this was the end of Daniel's description, the skeptics then would be right to say that it was just some sort of a riddle, and that there would be nothing prophetic about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. After all, history had already shown that one kingdom overthrows another. Nebuchadnezzar would have been left to guess which of Earth's empires was represented by each metallic portion of that statue, and Daniel's name, of course, would have passed unnoticed from history. But Daniel continues with his interpretation of the dream, and by the 8th chapter of Daniel, we notice over in Daniel 8 verses 20 and 21 that he clearly predicts the precise names of the next two empires. Daniel 8 and verses 20 and 21. The ram which you saw having two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia, and the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So he clearly predicts who the next empires are going to be. And then he went on accurately to describe the geopolitics of the region right down to today's society. 26 centuries have come and gone since that night of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And the geopolitical history of Europe and the Middle East leaves no question about the accuracy of Daniel's interpretation. Babylon and each of the successive empires rose and fell in perfect, predicted harmony. And today, as Nebuchadnezzar's dream also predicted, Europe stands firmly united, and in many ways, but yet still divided and fearing for its future. That which should interest us most about this mighty rolling clash of civilizations is the disturbingly common factors that caused each of the empires to fall, and how clearly those same destructive factors are seen in our world this morning. The famous English historian Edward Gibbon, in his book The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, wrote, and I quote, "The images of gold, silver or brass that might serve to represent the nations and their kings were successively broken by the iron monarchy of Rome." Gibbon was often scathing of Christianity and he hated organised religion. He hated the church. Yet he still acknowledged that the timeline of these kingdoms shown in Daniel 2 are historically accurate. Today, we should remind ourselves that Jesus Christ, who lived in Palestine under the reign of the Roman Empire, also regularly spoke out against organised religion. This was especially the case whenever he saw the religious leaders where they had perverted the love and the compassion of God into a self-serving, hierarchical, money and power-focused institution. Notice with me in Matthew 23, and we'll look at verses 27 and 28. Jesus called these religious leaders whitewashed tombs. Matthew 23, verses 27 and 28. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. What a condemnation to the church of the day. While the religious leaders paraded their religiosity among a facade of extravagant temples, priceless artefacts, and awe-inspiring worship services, and you must admit that the sanctuary service was awe-inspiring, for more than 6 centuries, Rome paraded its seemingly indestructible strength of iron. Over time, the Iron Empire, however, began to rust. It lost its steely grip on its territories, and by 476 AD, the year officially recognised to be the end of the Western Roman Empire, it had fragmented into how many kingdoms? 10. It fragmented into 10 kingdoms, as represented by Daniel's statues of the feet and the toes of iron and clay. So what did Daniel's predicted fragmentation of the Roman Empire into 10 kingdoms actually look like? It's a good question. Well, many of those 10 kingdoms, or tribes as they were sometimes called, went on to become what we know today as today's Europe. For instance, the Franks became the French. The Goths became the Germans. The Britons, Angles and Saxons became Britain, England and Saxony. Religiously, pagan Rome gave its power to papal Rome, also known as the Holy See, which today is the government of the Catholic Church. A key event in transferring of this power was AD 533, and it was a decree by the Roman Emperor Justinian in which he declared the Pope of Rome, who happened to be John II at the time, to be the chief of the bishops of all the churches, and so that elevated him to become the Pope. The Emperor sought peace with a Pope that might bring moral compass for society, and the Pope sought the Emperor's military prowess to achieve the Church's goals. Welcome to the Dark Ages, where millions of people gave their lives for the faith that they held dear. Let's look more closely, however, at the statue's feet and toes of iron and clay, the European powers that exist today. Daniel accurately predicted again what we would find. This mixture of iron and clay also shows that the kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances one with the other, and they were doing it through intermarriage, but it wouldn't hold together, just as iron and clay don't mix. Ever since the efforts to unify Europe by Charlemagne in the 9th century. We've seen others like Louis XIV, Charles V, Napoleon and others trying to unite Europe. Even England's Queen Victoria, known as the grandmother of Europe, due to her orchestrating the intermarriage of Europe's ruling families, tried to unite the continent. Every attempt failed repeatedly, fulfilling Daniel's prophecy. One of Queen Victoria's grandchildren, Kaiser William II, was the Emperor of Germany in World War I, and it is believed that the Kaiser understood Daniel's predictions, but he said that Daniel's prophecy did not fit in with his plan. And because of that, he was going to rule Europe. But he failed, the same as Charlemagne had failed. And he just didn't successfully unite Europe. After the Second World War, the uniting of Europe was seen to be a way of avoiding the extremes of nationalism that had all but destroyed the continent. Alliances delicately arranged around the goals of peace and security through unity led to what we now call the European Union, or the EU, an entity that some media commentators prefer to call the Europe Project, because true unity is proving to be a serious challenge. The EU's two biggest members, Germany and France, worked tirelessly to strengthen and to fortify the union, but its fractures and imbalances are visibly growing. Less than 30 years since the hope-filled signing of the Maastricht Treaty that officially birthed the European Union, Europe's fragile harmony is under phenomenal strain. A number of its once open borders are being walled up, literally, because of unwanted immigration. Social and religious phobias are dividing parliaments, boardrooms and playgrounds. Economic inequality, rising unemployment and political extremism are gaining ground. The iron and the clay are just not mixing. You might ask, don't the United Nations and the EU and the US and the Vatican all have it under control? Well, aren't they working toward another great empire that's being built? Surely, even if there were a few cracks in the system, our combined creativity, goodwill and ingenuity would help avoid any real catastrophes, wouldn't you think? Looking at our collective assets, we certainly appear to have the brains and the resources to build a new one world order. This climate of brotherhood and unity and future-focused thinking is the perfect time to implement what we have learnt from the empires that have gone before us, and to see what Daniel's prophecy so clearly says about what will actually happen on planet Earth in the very near future. History has a way of leaving single words that encapsulates tectonic shifts in the social, economic and political direction. You'll remember words such as glasnost, perestroika, 9/11, apartheid. Each word represents an ideological tsunami that has changed modern history for better or for worse. And as we move our gaze toward the sobering but exciting events that are about to take place on earth, Daniel also gives us a single word that is loaded with a powerful meaning. His word is shalva, and it means peace. In Daniel's 8th chapter, we see a description of proud, cunning, deceptive, worldwide power that will exist in the last days of Earth's history. In the time of the statue's toes, it will prosper and thrive and display mighty power, but its power will actually come from others. Daniel also says that this powerful entity, which already exists in our world today, will cause deceit to prosper, and by peace shall destroy many. How on earth can peace be used to destroy, you might ask? Aren't peace and prosperity the ultimate protectors of humanity? Today, nations dread insecurity above any other fear. World leaders run to and fro across the face of the planet, frantically trying to negotiate deals that will ensure economic and military security for their people. We are surrendering our once cherished morality and freedoms for an apparition, a false sense of security. Because there's more to being secure than having robust borders, economic prowess, employment, healthcare, and a formidable military. That's not to say that these benefits aren't wonderful, or that our security forces are not both necessary and powerful. In fact, they are. Truly, our armed forces that are on planet Earth today are more powerful than any in prior time of Earth's history, but they won't be enough. Daniel pulls no punches when he announced his literally earth-shattering conclusion. Daniel 2, let's go back there again. Let's notice verses 31 to 34 again. Daniel 2:31. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendour was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, the chest of arms and silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, and struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and brake them in pieces. You find that a bit further down in verses 44 and 45, Daniel continues. Let's notice verse 44. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, the interpretation is sure. Now that you and I this morning have overviewed the past 2,600 years, let's focus our attention on today's religio-political alliances. Alliances that were also predicted in the ancient writings. It is during the days of these alliances, our days, that the last empire will be established. With many modern wars being fought over religious differences rather than geographical or political quarrels, it's no surprise when the retired Israeli President Shimon Peres visited Pope Francis at the Vatican and presented to the pontiff his plan to create a sort of United Nations for religions. By the Catholic online press, Peres, who happens to be a Jew, was reported in July 2015 as saying to Pope Francis, and I quote, "Given that the United Nations has run its course, what we need is an organisation of united religions as the best way to counteract these terrorists who kill in the name of their faith." And he goes on to say a bit further down, "What we need is an unquestionable moral authority who says out loud, 'No, God doesn't want this and he doesn't allow it.'" Peres said that Pope Francis would be the best person to lead such a global entity because perhaps for the first time in history, the Holy Father is the leader of who's respected not just by a lot of people, but by different religions and their representatives as well. Pope Francis's grandfatherly face has quickly become an icon for magazine covers, including the magazine Rolling Stone, Life, America, Fortune, Vanity Fair, The Advocate Esquire, and even National Geographic. In September 2015, the Time magazine ran a story titled Pope Francis and the New Roman Empire, and those of you who subscribe to Time may remember that article. He asked a question: can Francis, with no army, no global financial clout, leverage his popularity in developing the world to influence the great powers, especially the US? Based on Daniel's prediction, what do you think the answer would be? Very clearly, yes. The papacy's moral megaphone is on full volume, and the Pope's messages are being applauded across the globe this morning. Francis has met cordially with key leaders of every major religion on planet Earth, and all the world's most influential presidents, prime ministers, including our own, and diplomats have created every opportunity to visit him inside the opulence of the Vatican. His address to the entire United States Congress, the first ever for a pope, and his speech at the United Nations Summit in New York were received with multiple standing ovations as the megastar Pope expanded his globe-encompassing ministry. It all adds up to a hectic but very powerful schedule for the monarch of the smallest nation on earth, the apparently humble clergyman. So history rolls on in repetitive wave after wave. Again, just in the days of Emperor Justinian and in the days of Pope John II that we started with, the world seeks a leader to be a moral compass for our fracturing society. We hope for some sort of global alliance that can give us peace and security, or at least deliver us some feelings of peace and security. The very same prophecy that so accurately predicted the construction and destruction of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece and Rome, and our own divided Europe clearly states that we cannot rely on security or the morality of human alliances to save us. There is no military, political or religious leader on earth today who can successfully orchestrate world peace, global security, or end to the all-persuasive immorality that is sweeping our planet right now. Based on Daniel's historical accurate timeline, today we are living in the toes of the statue, maybe even in the toenails. Humanity has almost run its course. Daniel's stone, cut out without hands, is about to smash into history. God is about to set up his kingdom, and no empire, no alliance, and no religion will stand against it. Over 1900 years ago, a Roman citizen who is best known to us today as the Apostle Paul predicted that the arrival of the very last empire would come as a great surprise to many on earth. And I'd like to direct your attention to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Let's go over to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and notice together verses 1 to 3. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 to 3. Here he tells us that the coming of the Lord would be like a thief in the night. Verse 1. But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. And when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labour pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. The establishment of this very last empire will be literal, it will be personal, it will be visible, and it will be a global event. That's a rock-solid fact. The history of tomorrow is as unavoidable as the evidence for the rise and fall of Babylon and the other kingdoms that followed it. As Daniel looked down through time to our day, in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 4, he saw that the world would be running backwards and forwards between the nations, and knowledge would be increasing at a phenomenal rate. And it would probably pay us to have a look at Daniel 12 and verse 4. Let's just notice it for a minute together. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 4. My Bible says this: "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." Have you witnessed an increase in knowledge in your lifetime? I certainly have. When I was a child, it was only radios that you listened to, then black and white television. And didn't we have our noses stuck up against the shop windows of an evening? Knowledge increases a bit more, and we now have colour TVs. And not big cathode ray tube things, we have these little thin plasma ones that hang up on the wall. How much better is it going to get before the end comes? Today, technology allows instantaneous reporting of global events. Yet, we see reports of the world's deteriorating political, economic, social, environmental and moral conditions. And we can't avoid seeing the evidence of a rapidly escalating last day events as the book of Revelation portrays to us. These are the very events that were predicted to happen in the time of the end, right down in the time of the toes. And Matthew 24 gives us some really good input there. Let's go to Matthew 24 for a moment and just look at a few verses together. Matthew chapter 24, verses 3 to 8, talks about wars and pestilence and famine. Matthew 24, verse 3, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?' And Jesus answered and said to them, 'Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and deceive many.'" Have we seen that? Absolutely. "And you will hear of wars and rumours of wars. Every night on the news you get an earful. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences," COVID-19, "and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of sorrows." Come down to verse 21, and we'll notice a few verses there. "For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'there,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, you and I, the very elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, 'Look, he is in the desert,' do not go out. 'Look, he's in the inner rooms,' don't believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. I'd just like to notice verse 42 in the same chapter. And we're given there a challenge, I guess. Watch therefore. Are we watching, each one of us this morning? Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. And verse 43, but know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. And verse 44, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Edward Carr, foreign editor of The Economist magazine, recently wrote a classic weather forecast for the state of the world, and it goes this way. Just now, the world seems uncommonly hard to manage. Make sense? How true that really is. So today, the prophet Daniel is respected across the world by Jews, by Christians, by Muslims, and even many people who don't claim any faith at all. In the ominous, darkening shadow of current world events, millions are turning back to his writing and finding guidance and hope for the future. And as the daily news rolls, we see pessimistic reports of doom and gloom. But Daniel brings hope. He reveals the strategies of a loving God who is about to make a worldwide announcement. Game over. Nobody knows how much longer Earth's history will last. Even Daniel's prophecies don't give us an exact day or hour for the establishment of the last empire. This morning, though, we need to ask ourselves some serious questions. Today, is my heart filled with the distractions, the busyness, the entertainments, the self-desires of this world? Have I let my moral compass wander in my pursuit of financial security and my comfortable lifestyle? Am I personally ready for God to set up his eternal kingdom? Is my conscience clear? Is my heart pure? Am I prepared to confess my sins and turn from them, and to accept God's offer of his Son, Jesus, as my Saviour? There is one important question that remains to be answered, and the question is, am I ready? Is my prayer this morning. Let's close with the use of hymn 108, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound.